The 175-year-old mystery that would attract ruthless collectors, desperate government agents, and dangerous criminal syndicates to a forgotten cattle ranch in Montana's rugged wilderness. All discovered by one grieving widow's last bold attempt to rescue her late husband's lifelong vision from the jaws of financial ruin. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The harsh winter wind howled through the Montana mountains like a wounded animal as Eleanor Blackwood's worn boots crunched across the frozen pasture of what locals had begun calling Blackwood's Blunder. She surveyed the sprawling 1,200 acres of Evergreen Valley Ranch, a cattle operation that hadn't turned a profit in over 5 years and was now just 72 hours away from bank seizure if she couldn't produce $125,000 in overdue payments. At 42, Eleanor had never imagined herself as a rancher. She'd been a successful wildlife veterinarian in Bozeman, someone who preferred the controlled environment of research facilities to the brutal unpredictability of Montana mountain winters. But the ranch had been her late husband Michael's obsession for nearly 15 years, and she couldn't bear to lose the final tangible connection to the man she'd shared 18 years of marriage with. The property had been plagued with misfortune since Michael's father purchased it in 1964. Equipment breakdowns, cattle disease outbreaks, and 3 devastating blizzards had driven away 4 different ranch managers over the decades. The neighbors in Evergreen Valley whispered about the Blackwood curse, but Eleanor knew the real problems were more mundane, outdated facilities, overwhelming debt, and relentless pressure from corporate cattle operations that had gradually pushed out family-owned ranches across Montana. "You really need to face reality here," said Jack Harmon, Michael's former business partner and the only real estate agent willing to handle the troubled property. He had driven up from Bozeman to help Eleanor with what everyone assumed would be her final visit before surrendering to foreclosure. The drive had taken him nearly 4 hours through winding mountain roads, passing through small towns that seemed frozen in time. The bank's offer to forgive 40% of the remaining debt if you sign over the deed today is more generous than you'll get anywhere else, given this property's history. Jack had known Michael since their days at Montana State University, where they'd both studied agricultural business before Michael developed his ranching passion and Jack went into real estate. He'd watched his friend pour his heart, soul, and eventually his entire life savings into this remote mountain property that seemed determined to resist every attempt at profitability. Eleanor pulled her jacket tighter against the bitter mountain air, her eyes fixed on the old ranch house that had stood since 1848. The structure was a testament to frontier craftsmanship, built from local timber and stone that had weathered more than a century and a half of harsh Montana winters. Michael had died there 8 months ago, collapsing in the basement while reviewing old property records. The doctors called it a sudden aneurysm, unpredictable, impossible to prevent. By the time Eleanor found him after driving up from her veterinary clinic in Bozeman, he had been gone for hours. The memory still haunted her walking into the basement to find Michael slumped over a pile of old documents, his reading glasses askew, surrounded by boxes of historical materials he'd been obsessively collecting for months. The paramedics said he probably died instantly, but Eleanor couldn't shake the image of him spending his final moments alone, pursuing some historical mystery that had consumed his thoughts. "I know it doesn't make financial sense," Eleanor replied, studying the foreclosure notice that had arrived that morning. The legal document was brutally precise in its language. Evergreen Valley Ranch, 1,200 acres. Historic homestead established. 1,848. Original stone foundation. Natural spring water rights. $350,000 minimum bid. Property sold as is, no inspections due. 2 ongoing federal mineral rights survey complications. The final line had puzzled several potential buyers who had inquired about the property over the past months. Eleanor had researched the survey issue extensively, making calls to various government offices and mining departments. It appeared to be a routine geological assessment related to old mining claims that affected several properties in the valley part of a federal review of mineral rights dating back to the 1800s. Nothing that should significantly impact the ranch's value, according to the bureaucrats she'd spoken with. "I can't explain it, Jack," she continued, her breath visible in the cold air. "But I feel like I owe it to Michael to try one more time. He was so convinced this place held some kind of potential beyond just cattle ranching. He spent his final months obsessively digging into the property's history, going through old county records, even consulting with local historians and Civil War researchers." She gestured toward the main house where Michael had converted the old study into a makeshift research center. He had maps and documents spread across every surface in there, tracing the property's history back to its original homesteader. He kept saying there was something special about this land, something that went beyond its agricultural value. Jack shook his head, kicking at a clump of frozen earth with his expensive city shoes. He'd never quite understood Michael's romantic attachment to this remote property. That was just Michael being Michael, always chasing dreams and legends. "Eleanor, you've already exhausted most of your savings trying to keep up with the mortgage payments. Your veterinary practice barely covers your apartment rent in Bozeman. You can't save a ranch that's been failing for decades." The numbers were indeed stark. Eleanor had done the math countless times, sitting at her kitchen table in Bozeman, surrounded by bills and bank statements. Between her veterinary income, Michael's modest life insurance payout, and a loan against her retirement fund, she could maybe hold on to the property for another 3 months at most. The mortgage payments alone were $4,500 monthly, not counting property taxes, insurance, and the constant maintenance costs that came with managing 1,200 acres of mountain property. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her plan was ambitious and probably unrealistic. Convert part of the historic ranch house into a high-end agricultural tourism retreat, marketing to wealthy urban families who wanted authentic Western experiences. She'd partner with Montana tourism boards for heritage tours, highlighting the area's connection to the Civil War era and the early settlement of the Montana Territory. Maybe develop a small museum showcasing the ranch's connection to Montana's military history. The ranch sat along what had once been a crucial supply route for Union forces during the Montana Territory conflicts of the 1860s, when Confederate sympathizers had attempted to claim the region's gold resources for the Southern cause. Michael had discovered references to the property in old military dispatches, suggesting the original owner, a man named Major Samuel Thornton, had been involved in government operations in ways that went beyond simple cattle ranching. Thornton had arrived in Montana Territory in 1867, just after the end of the regional conflicts, claiming to be a retired Union officer seeking a peaceful life raising cattle. But Michael's research had uncovered military records suggesting Thornton's role had been far more complex and potentially lucrative than simple military service. "Have you heard back from the Montana Historical Society about the Civil War research?" Jack asked as they approached the ranch house, their footsteps echoing on the wooden porch that wrapped around the front of the building. "Dr. Redhawk seemed interested when I called last week," Eleanor replied, referring to the Native American historian who specialized in 19th century Montana Territory conflicts. Dr. Melissa Redhawk was a respected academic at the University of Montana, known for her meticulous research into the complex relationships between military forces, native tribes, and civilian settlers during the territorial period. But she needs more than family stories to support a historic designation. The documentation requirements are extensive, and most of what Michael found was circumstantial. The wind picked up, rattling the old windows of the ranch house, and sending dried leaves swirling across the yard. Eleanor looked across the empty corrals where Michael's cattle should have been thriving. The herd was down to just 24 head, another casualty of the severe drought that had plagued the Montana Rockies for the past 3 years, combined with feed costs that had skyrocketed as agricultural resources became scarce. The cattle that remained were beautiful animals, mainly Angus, bred for both ranch work and premium beef production. Michael had maintained high standards for his breeding program, even as the financial pressures mounted. Eleanor had been trying to find good homes for them before the foreclosure, knowing that keeping quality breeding stock wasn't something you just abandoned to chance. "Remember when we used to come out here for summer barbecues?" Eleanor asked, her voice carrying a note of wistful sadness as she gazed across the valley. Michael would drive us up from Bozeman, and his father would have that big table set up on the front porch. The cattle were magnificent then, running free across the valley as far as you could see. Those had been happier times when the ranch still felt like a weekend retreat rather than a financial albatross. Michael's father, Robert Blackwood, had been a legendary figure in Montana cattle breeding circles, known for producing animals that combined docility, hardiness, and the sturdy constitution needed for mountain ranch work. He'd purchased the mountain property in 1964 from the estate of the Thornton family, who had owned it continuously since the 1860s. Jack nodded, his expression softening as he remembered those gatherings. Old Man Blackwood made the best bison steaks in Evergreen Valley. Michael always said this place was magical, that it held secrets nobody else knew about. I thought he was just being poetic, talking about the spiritual connection to the land and all that. "Maybe that's what I'm really trying to save," Eleanor admitted, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. "Not just the property, but the secrets. The history that dies with a place when it's sold to developers or corporate ranching operations. Once this land gets divided up and developed, any historical significance it might have had will be lost forever." She pulled out her phone and showed Jack the photographs Michael had taken during his research. The images included screenshots of old military records, photographs of faded documents from various archives, pictures of strange markings he'd found carved into the basement stone walls. Michael had been methodical in his documentation, creating a digital archive of everything he discovered. "Look at this," she said, swiping through the photos. Michael found these references in the Montana State Archives, military dispatches from the 1860s, mentioning a secure depot in Evergreen Valley. They never specify the exact location, but the geographical descriptions match our property. Perfectly references to the stone house by the natural spring and valley protected by Twin Peaks to the east. Jack studied the images on her phone screen, squinting at the faded text of historical documents. The writing was in the formal military style of the 1860s, with references to troop movements, supply deliveries, and payments to civilian contractors. Several documents mention payments to Major S. Thornton for specialized storage and security services. "And look at this one," Eleanor continued, showing him a photograph of what appeared to be a military map. "This shows the supply routes through Montana Territory during 1863 to 1864. There's a marked location here in Evergreen Valley labeled as Depot T with a note about enhanced security protocols." The implications were intriguing, but Jack remained skeptical. Military supply depots were common throughout the Montana Territory during the Civil War period, necessary for maintaining Union control over the region's valuable mineral resources. "Eleanor, even if this place was some kind of military depot, that doesn't necessarily mean there's anything of value here now. It was over 150 years ago." "But Michael found more than just military records," Eleanor insisted, her excitement growing as she shared her husband's discoveries. "He traced Major Thornton's financial records through territorial banking documents. Thornton was receiving Payments far beyond what a simple supply depot operator would earn thousands of dollars in 1860s currency, which would be worth millions today. She showed Jack another series of documents. These are bank transfer records from Montana Territorial Bank, showing regular deposits to Thornton's account from something called Federal Oversight Treasury, amounts that were enormous for that time period. Michael calculated that Thornton received over $75,000 in 1864 alone. Jack whistled low. In 1864, $75,000 would have been equivalent to well over $2 million in modern purchasing power. What was he doing to earn that kind of money? That's what Michael was trying to figure out when he died, Eleanor said quietly. His last research focused on something called the Western Treasury Reserve, a classified military financial operation that apparently operated out of remote locations throughout the territory. The records are fragmentary, but Michael believed Thornton was running much more than just a supply depot. They had reached the front door of the ranch house, and Eleanor paused before entering. The building's stone construction was unusual for ranch houses of the period, most of which were built from readily available timber. The stone had been quarried locally, but the construction showed a level of craftsmanship and defensive thinking more appropriate for a fortress than a ranch house. The architecture is another clue, Eleanor explained, running her hand along the stone wall. Michael consulted with historical architects about the building's design. They said the stone construction, the placement of windows, and especially the oversized basement suggested the building was designed for storage and security rather than just residential use. Jack examined the structure with new interest. The windows were smaller than typical for ranch houses, positioned high on the walls and designed more for defense than for light. The front door was made of thick oak, reinforced with iron bands, and the stone walls were nearly 2 feet thick in some places. It does look more like a fort than a ranch house, he admitted. But Eleanor, even if Michael was right about the historical significance, how does that help with the foreclosure? Historical designation takes months or years to achieve, and you need the money in 3 days. Eleanor's shoulders sagged slightly as the reality of her situation reasserted itself. I know. I keep hoping that somehow Michael's research will lead to something, a grant opportunity. A buyer interested in the historical value, maybe even archaeological significance that could protect the property from development. She unlocked the heavy front door, and they stepped into the ranch house's main room. The interior reflected the building's dual nature as both home and fortress. The main room had a massive stone fireplace, thick walls that muffled outside sounds, and exposed wooden beams that spoke of frontier craftsmanship. But it was clearly Michael's research materials that dominated the space now. Every wall was covered with maps, timelines, and photocopies of historical documents. Bookshelves overflowed with volumes on Montana territorial history, Civil War, military operations, and biographical accounts of frontier figures. Boxes of documents were stacked throughout the room, each carefully labeled with Michael's meticulous handwriting. My God, Jack said, turning slowly to take in the extent of Michael's research. I knew he was interested in the history, but this is obsession. It started gradually, Eleanor explained, moving to Michael's desk where his laptop still sat open. At first, it was just curiosity about the property's history, something to fill the evenings during the long winters. But then he found the first military dispatch mentioning Thornton, and it was like something clicked. He became convinced. There was more to this ranch than anyone realized. She opened the laptop and brought up a folder labeled Thornton Investigation. Inside were hundreds of files, photographs of documents, scanned maps, architectural analyses, and financial records, all meticulously organized and cross-referenced. Look at this, she said, opening a document titled Thornton Financial Analysis. The spreadsheet detailed Major Thornton's known income from military contracts between 1864 and 1878, showing payments that far exceeded standard military compensation. Michael traced deposits totaling over $300,000 over a 14-year period, all from government sources, all related to what they called special security operations. That's equivalent to nearly $8 million in today's currency. Jack leaned closer, studying the financial records with growing interest. These are legitimate government transactions? Absolutely, Eleanor confirmed. Michael verified every entry against official territorial bank records and military payment logs. These weren't under-the-table payments. They were authorized by the highest levels of the Federal Treasury Department. She opened another file showing official Treasury Department correspondence with Thornton. The letters, written in formal government language, referenced secured assets, stabilization operations, and territorial reserve management. Michael's theory was that Thornton wasn't just running a supply depot. Eleanor continued, her voice growing more animated. He was operating a secret government financial installation, a place where the federal government stored and secured gold, silver, and other valuable assets during the unstable period after the Civil War. The theory wasn't as far-fetched as it might have sounded initially. During the Civil War and its aftermath, the federal government had faced enormous challenges managing the nation's finances. Gold reserves were critical for backing the currency and maintaining economic stability, but traditional treasury facilities in eastern cities were vulnerable to various threats, from Confederate sympathizers to financial speculators to foreign interventions. Michael found evidence that the government established a network of secret financial repositories throughout the Western Territories. Eleanor explained, showing Jack a map that Michael had created. Remote locations difficult to access, operated by trusted former military officers. Evergreen Valley Ranch was apparently one of the most significant of these installations. She pulled up photographs of the strange markings Michael had discovered. In the basement, symbols carved into the stone foundation walls, hidden beneath decades of paint and plaster. The symbols were geometric and precise, showing what appeared to be directional indicators, numerical sequences, and what Michael had identified as military security codes from the Civil War period. These markings are what convinced Michael that there was more to the ranch than just its surface buildings, Eleanor said. He believed they were guide markers for something hidden beneath the property, something valuable enough to require elaborate security measures. Jack studied the photographs, his skepticism gradually giving way to curiosity. What exactly did he think was hidden here? Eleanor took a deep breath, knowing how outlandish it would sound. Gold, lots of it. Michael believed that Evergreen Valley Ranch was used to store millions of dollars in government gold reserves during and after the Civil War. Gold that was never fully accounted for when the installation was decommissioned in 1878. She showed Jack another document. This one a partially redacted military report from 1878, discussing the termination of special security operations at Montana Territory installations. The report mentioned asset transfer protocols and inventory reconciliation, but contained no specific details about what happened to the stored materials. This is where the story gets really interesting, Eleanor said, opening a file containing newspaper clippings from 1878, 2 weeks after this termination order was issued. Major Thornton died under mysterious circumstances. The official report called it a riding accident, but this local newspaper article tells a different story. The newspaper account described how Thornton had been found dead near the ranch's northern boundary, apparently thrown from his horse. But the article noted unusual circumstances surrounding the death, including reports from ranch hands who claimed to have heard gunshots that morning and witnessed unknown riders leaving the property. Michael believed Thornton was killed to prevent him from revealing something about the financial installation, Eleanor explained. And more importantly, he believed that after Thornton's death, the government never completed the removal of assets from the property. The gold was essentially forgotten, lost in bureaucratic confusion during the transition from territorial to state government. Jack leaned back against the desk, trying to process the implications of Michael's research. Eleanor, if even half of this is true, it would be one of the most significant historical discoveries in Montana history. But it still doesn't solve your immediate problem with the foreclosure. That's why I need to go down to the basement, Eleanor said quietly. I need to see what Michael was working on when he died. I've been avoiding it for 8 months, but if I'm going to lose this place in 3 days, I owe it to him to finish what he started. The basement had been Michael's primary focus in his final weeks. According to his notes, he had been carefully examining the stone foundation, looking for architectural inconsistencies that might indicate hidden chambers or storage areas. He had been convinced that the basement held the key to understanding Thornton's true operations. Jack looked uncertain about the plan. Eleanor, are you sure you're ready for that? It might be emotionally difficult, going back to where I have to, Eleanor interrupted. Michael died trying to uncover the truth about this place. If there's any chance his research could save the ranch, I need to see it through. As they prepared to descend into the basement where Michael had spent his final hours, Eleanor felt a mixture of grief and determination. The next 72 hours would determine whether Evergreen Valley Ranch would be lost forever, or whether Michael's obsessive research would finally reveal the secrets he had been so convinced lay hidden beneath the Montana mountains. The failing cattle ranch that had seemed like such a burden now felt like the keeper of mysteries that could reshape everything Eleanor thought she knew about her husband's final months and the true history of their mountain valley. The heavy oak door of the ranch house closed behind them with a solid thud that seemed to seal out the harsh Montana wind. Inside, the warmth from the stone fireplace created a cocoon of comfort that contrasted sharply with the emotional weight Eleanor felt every time she entered the space. 8 months after Michael's death, his presence still permeated every corner of the house, from his reading glasses left on the kitchen counter to his favorite coffee mug that she couldn't bring herself to wash. Eleanor moved through the main room slowly, her fingers trailing along the furniture they had chosen together during happier times. The leather sofa where they used to plan their future, the antique desk where Michael had spent countless hours poring over historical documents, the bookshelf filled with volumes on Western history that had once seemed like an interesting hobby but had gradually consumed his every waking moment. I still can't believe he's gone, she said quietly, picking up a framed photograph from the mantelpiece. The image showed Michael at age 38, standing proudly next to a magnificent black Angus bull named Montana Midnight, the animal that had won 3 regional championships and put Evergreen Valley Ranch on the map of serious cattle breeding operations. Michael's smile in the photo was genuine and hopeful. This was before the financial pressures had begun to mount, before his historical obsession had taken over their lives. Jack settled into one of the chairs near the fireplace, watching Eleanor with the careful attention of someone who had known her for over a decade. He had been Michael's best man at their wedding in 2007, had shared countless weekends at the ranch during the good years, and had watched their marriage evolve as Michael's passion for the property gradually shifted from cattle to history. Tell me about those final months, Jack said gently. I know this is difficult, but I feel like I need to understand what was really happening with Michael's research. Maybe there's something there that could help with the foreclosure situation. Eleanor sat down across from him, the photograph still in her hands. It started about 18 months ago, right after we had that terrible summer with the wildfire. We lost the entire east pasture, and insurance only covered about 60% of the restoration costs. Michael was devastated, not just about the money, but about the damage to the land itself. She set the photograph aside and moved to one of Michael's research boxes, pulling out a leather-bound journal with his neat handwriting covering every page. He started spending time in the basement, examining the foundation walls. At first, I thought he was just checking for structural damage from the drought. The shifting soil had caused some minor cracking in the older sections. Opening the journal to the first entry, dated May 12, 2023, she read Michael's words aloud. Found something unusual today while inspecting the north wall. Beneath a section of peeling plaster, there appears to be carved symbols in the stonework, not random marks, but deliberate patterns that resemble military coordinates or survey markers. Could be related to the original construction, but the precision suggests something more purposeful. Eleanor turned to another entry, dated 2 weeks later. Located county records for original Thornton homestead. Property registration shows unusual classification, special purpose agricultural, with federal oversight notation. Requesting additional documents from Montana Historical Society. The journal chronicled Michael's growing fascination with the property's history, each entry showing his evolution from casual curiosity to focused investigation to complete obsession. By September 2023, he was making weekly trips to state archives, consulting with historical researchers, and spending thousands of dollars acquiring rare documents related to Montana's territorial period. He became convinced that Major Thornton wasn't just a retired military officer turned rancher, Eleanor explained. The financial records were the first major clue no ordinary rancher in 1860s. Montana could accumulate that kind of wealth from cattle alone. She showed Jack one of Michael's most significant discoveries, banking records from the Montana Territorial Bank showing regular deposits to Thornton's account between 1864 and 1878. The amounts were substantial, often exceeding $5,000 per quarter, at a time when the average annual income was less than $500. All these payments came from a federal account labeled Western Treasury Reserve Operations, Eleanor explained. Michael couldn't find any official explanation of what this operation was, but he uncovered references to it in military correspondence and Treasury Department records from the post-Civil War period. Jack's eyes widened as he calculated the modern equivalent. That would be millions of dollars in today's money. What was he doing to earn that kind of payment? That's what Michael was trying to figure out when he died, Eleanor said quietly. His final research focused on the possibility that Montana Territory was being used as a secure storage location for federal gold reserves during and after the Civil War. The idea was that remote, defensible locations could protect Treasury assets from potential threats or political instability in Washington. The theory made sense from a military perspective. During the Civil War, the federal government had been deeply concerned about protecting gold reserves that funded the war effort. Remote locations with trusted military personnel could provide security that urban banks might not be able to guarantee. Eleanor showed Jack a map that Michael had created, marking locations throughout Montana Territory where similar operations might have existed. Michael identified at least 8 properties that received payments from the Western Treasury Reserve Operation. Most of them were remote ranches or mining claims owned by former military officers. And you think Evergreen Valley Ranch was one of these storage locations? Jack asked. Michael was convinced of it, Eleanor replied. But more than that, he believed our property might have been the primary facility, the central depot, where gold from other locations was consolidated before being transported to federal banks in Denver or back east. She pulled out Michael's final research notebook, its pages filled with increasingly excited handwriting as his discoveries had accelerated. In his last weeks, Michael found evidence suggesting that the Civil War Treasury operation didn't end in 1865. According to these documents, the Western Treasury Reserve continued operating through at least 1878, storing gold not just from wartime activities, but from ongoing mining operations and territorial taxation. The implications were staggering. If Michael's research was accurate, Evergreen Valley Ranch hadn't just been a temporary wartime storage facility, it had been the center of a decade-long federal operation that had accumulated vast amounts of gold and other valuable assets. Jack studied the timeline Michael had constructed, tracking the operation from its wartime origins through the territorial period and into Montana statehood. Eleanor, if this is true, there really was a federal treasury operation here for over 14 years. What happened to all that gold? That's the question that was driving Michael crazy, Eleanor said, her voice growing more animated as she shared her husband's passion for the mystery. The official records suggest the operation was terminated in 1878. There's no documentation of what happened to the stored assets. No record of gold being transported elsewhere. No acknowledgement that the storage facilities were emptied. She showed Jack a newspaper clipping from 1878 that Michael had discovered in the archives of the Montana Post. The article, buried on an inside page, mentioned the retirement of several federal territorial contractors and the conclusion of special government storage arrangements in remote Montana locations. The timing is significant, Eleanor pointed out. This article appeared just 2 weeks after Major Thornton's mysterious death. Michael believed Thornton was killed because he knew too much about the treasury operation and might have been planning to expose it or make claims on the stored assets. Jack was beginning to understand the scope of Michael's obsession. This wasn't just amateur treasure hunting. It was serious historical research that suggested a massive federal conspiracy spanning decades. Did Michael have any theories about where the gold might be now? Eleanor nodded, moving to the window that looked out toward the ranch's outbuildings. He spent his final months convinced that the gold was still here, hidden somewhere on the property. His research suggested that the operation ended so abruptly because of Thornton's death that there might not have been time to properly relocate the stored assets. She pointed toward the main barn, a massive stone structure that matched the architectural style of the ranch house. Michael believed the key was in understanding the relationship between the house, the barn, and the natural cave system that runs through the mountainside behind the property. He thought the storage facilities might have been built to take advantage of natural underground chambers. The idea wasn't far-fetched. The Montana Rockies were riddled with natural caves and underground formations that had been used for storage and shelter since prehistoric times. Military engineers would have recognized the strategic value of such locations for securing valuable assets. Jack, Eleanor said, turning back to him with a look of determination. What if Michael was right? What if there really is Civil War-era treasury gold hidden somewhere on this property? Jack considered the question carefully. He had known Michael well enough to trust his research abilities, and the documentation Eleanor had shown him was far more compelling than simple treasure hunting fantasies. Even if he was right, Eleanor, how would you go about proving it? More importantly, how would that help with the foreclosure situation? I've been thinking about that, Eleanor replied, moving to Michael's desk where his computer still displayed the last research project he had been working on. If I can prove the historical significance of this property, if I can document its role in federal treasury operations, it could qualify for emergency historical preservation status. That would at least delay the foreclosure while proper archaeological surveys are conducted. The computer screen showed a partially completed application for the National Register of Historic Places, with detailed documentation of Michael's research findings. He had been preparing a comprehensive submission that would establish Evergreen Valley Ranch as a site of exceptional historical significance. But more than that, Eleanor continued, Michael's research suggests that any gold or other assets found on the property would legally belong to the landowner under Montana's treasure trove laws. If the federal government abandoned the storage operation in 1878 without properly claiming the assets, they would have reverted to the property owner. Jack was intrigued by the legal implications. That's assuming you could prove the gold was actually here and that it was legally abandoned rather than relocated. Which brings us back to Michael's final research, Eleanor said, closing the laptop and looking toward the basement door. He was convinced he had identified the location of the main storage facility. His last notebook entries described finding architectural evidence in the basement that suggests hidden chambers or passages. The basement, the place where Michael had died, where Eleanor had been afraid to return for 8 months. But now, with foreclosure just days away, it seemed like her only hope for understanding what Michael had discovered and possibly saving the ranch. "Eleanor," Jack said gently, "are you really ready to go down there? It's going to be emotionally difficult, and there's no guarantee you'll find anything that will help with the foreclosure." Eleanor looked around the room filled with Michael's research at the maps and documents and photographs that represented his final passion. After a moment of reflection, she squared her shoulders and nodded firmly. "I have to do this, Jack, not just for the ranch, but for Michael." He believed in this so strongly that he spent his final days pursuing it. "I owe it to him to at least see what he discovered." The basement door stood before them like a gateway to the past, its heavy wooden frame worn smooth by more than a century of Montana winters. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the iron handle. Memories of that terrible day, 8 months ago, flooded back with vivid clarity. She could still see Michael's body slumped over his research materials, his reading glasses askew, surrounded by the historical documents that had consumed his final months. "Take your time," Jack said softly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We don't have to do this if you're not ready." Eleanor took a deep breath, drawing strength from the weight of Michael's research notebook in her hands. "No, I need to do this. Michael spent his last day down there, and I have to understand why." The door opened with a protesting creak, revealing stone steps that descended into darkness. The air that rose from below carried the scent of old stone and paper, mixed with something else, a metallic quality that Michael had mentioned in his final journal entries. As they began their descent, their flashlight beams revealed walls of carefully fitted stone blocks, each one precisely cut and positioned with the skill of master craftsmen. "My God," Jack breathed, examining the stonework as they descended. "This construction is incredible. These stones must weigh hundreds of pounds each, and they're fitted together so perfectly you couldn't slide a knife blade between them." Eleanor nodded, remembering Michael's excitement when he had first begun studying the basement's architecture. Michael consulted with experts from Montana Tech about the construction techniques. They said the stonework showed influences from both European masonry traditions and military engineering practices from the Civil War period. The basement was larger than Jack had expected, extending well beyond the footprint of the ranch house. Above, the space was roughly 50 feet square, with walls that rose 14 feet to support the stone arches that held up the main floor. But it was the organization of Michael's workspace that truly impressed him. Every corner of the basement had been transformed into a research station, with different areas dedicated to specific aspects of his investigation. Along the east wall, Michael had set up what appeared to be an archaeological documentation center. Cameras on tripods were positioned to photograph different sections of the stonework, while measured drawing boards held detailed architectural sketches. Plastic storage containers held stone samples, mortar fragments, and metal objects that Michael had apparently found during his excavations. He was treating this like a professional archaeological site, Eleanor observed, moving to examine Michael's photographic equipment. "Look at this." He documented every square foot of these walls with multiple angles and lighting conditions. Jack studied the photographs that Michael had printed and organized in binders. Each image was labeled with precise measurements and detailed notes about the location and significance of various features. The level of documentation was extraordinary, showing Michael's evolution from casual treasure hunter to serious historical researcher. "Here's what really caught his attention," Eleanor said, leading Jack to the north wall where Michael had focused much of his final research. The stone blocks in this section looked subtly different from the rest of the basement, with variations in color and texture that suggested they might have been added or modified after the original construction. Under the bright beam of their flashlights, the differences became more apparent. Several stones showed evidence of having been removed and replaced, with mortar lines that were slightly different in color and composition from the surrounding masonry. More intriguingly, many of these stones bore the carved symbols that had first captured Michael's attention. "These markings," Eleanor said, running her fingers along the carved lines. Michael spent months researching their meaning. He found similar symbols in military engineering manuals from the 1860s, but also in documents related to secret government operations during and after the Civil War. The symbols were diverse and complex. Some appeared to be directional markers or compass points carved with mathematical precision. Others looked like coded letters or numbers, possibly representing dates, quantities, or locations. A few seemed to be pictographic, showing stylized representations of objects or concepts that weren't immediately recognizable. Jack photographed several of the symbols with his phone, impressed by their clarity and purposefulness. "These definitely look intentional, not random scratches or natural formations." Michael's research suggested they formed a kind of map, Eleanor explained, opening one of Michael's notebooks to a page where he had attempted to decode the symbol patterns. He believed the symbols provided instructions for accessing hidden chambers or storage areas within the basement structure. She showed Jack a detailed diagram where Michael had mapped the location of every symbol on the north wall, connecting them with lines and arrows to show possible relationships. The pattern that emerged suggested a sequence of symbols that should be read in a specific order to reveal their meaning. According to Michael's notes, symbols like these were used by Union Army engineers to mark construction features that weren't obvious to casual observers: hidden entrances, secure storage areas, structural reinforcements. Jack examined the diagram with growing interest. So Michael thought these symbols would lead to some kind of hidden chamber? "More than that," Eleanor replied, turning to another page in the notebook. "He believed they were part of a sophisticated security system designed to protect whatever was stored here." Look at his translation of this symbol sequence. The notebook page showed Michael's careful decoding of several symbols, with annotations about their possible meanings: primary access indicator, directional guide, security protocol marker, depth designation. Michael consulted with cryptographers and military historians about these symbols, Eleanor explained. They confirmed that similar marking systems were used in Civil War-era military installations, particularly those designed for secure storage of valuable materials. She showed Jack comparative photographs from other Montana historical sites, built during the same period. The difference was striking. While most basement foundations from the 1860s were simple stone and mortar constructions designed for basic storage, the Evergreen Valley Ranch basement showed evidence of military engineering principles. "Look at these wall thickness measurements," Eleanor continued, pointing to Michael's architectural drawings. "The north and east walls are nearly 5 feet thick, twice as thick as needed for structural support." Michael consulted with civil engineers, who confirmed that this level of construction suggested the walls were designed to bear enormous weight or withstand external pressure. Jack studied the measurements, beginning to appreciate the scope of Michael's analysis. What kind of weight or pressure? "That's where the historical context becomes crucial," Eleanor replied, moving to a different section of Michael's research. Michael spent months studying Civil War-era military construction projects, particularly those designed for secure storage of valuable materials. She showed Jack a collection of documents from the National Archives describing Union Army engineering projects throughout the Western Territories. The materials included construction specifications for military depots, secure communication centers, and what the documents euphemistically called special storage facilities. According to these military engineering manuals, Eleanor explained, facilities designed to store large quantities of gold or other precious materials required specific construction features, reinforced foundations, controlled access points, environmental protection systems, and defensive capabilities. Michael had created a detailed comparison chart showing how the Evergreen Valley Ranch basement matched the specifications described in the military documents: stone selection, mortar composition, ventilation systems, every architectural feature aligned with Civil War-era military construction standards for high-security installations. But Michael's real breakthrough came when he started researching the broader context of federal gold storage during and after the Civil War. Eleanor continued, opening another binder labeled Western Treasury Reserve Historical Context. The materials in this section painted a picture of a vast federal operation that went far beyond what most Americans knew about their government's wartime activities. During the 1860s, the Union government had faced enormous challenges in financing the war effort while protecting the gold reserves that backed the federal currency. The official history teaches that most federal gold was stored in established banks and treasury facilities. Eleanor explained, showing Jack a standard American history textbook. But Michael found evidence of a parallel system, a network of secret storage facilities in remote locations designed to protect assets from Confederate raids, political instability, and economic panic. Jack examined documents that Michael had obtained from various archives, including the personal papers of Treasury officials, military commanders, and politicians involved in wartime financial policy. The materials revealed a complex web of classified operations designed to ensure the survival of the Union's economic system. "This letter is particularly significant," Eleanor said, showing Jack a handwritten correspondence from Secretary of the Treasury Salmon P. Chase to President Lincoln. It discussed the need for alternative storage protocols to protect federal assets from domestic and foreign threats to monetary stability. The letter, dated March 1864, outlined a plan to establish secure storage facilities in remote western locations where federal gold could be protected even if Washington, D.C. fell to Confederate forces. The language was careful and coded, but the implications were clear. The Union government was preparing for the possibility of catastrophic military defeat. Michael traced references to this alternative storage system through dozens of documents. Eleanor continued, showing Jack a timeline that Michael had constructed, tracking the development of what became the Western Treasury Reserve. The system started as an emergency wartime measure, but it evolved into something much larger and more permanent. The timeline revealed how the secret storage network had expanded throughout the Western territories, with facilities established in Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and other remote locations. Each facility was managed by trusted military officers who reported directly to a classified division within the Treasury Department. Major Samuel Thornton appears in the records as early as 1864, Eleanor explained, pointing to a military roster that Michael had discovered. But he wasn't just a cavalry officer, he was specifically recruited for the storage operation because of his background in engineering and his experience with secure transportation of valuable materials. Jack studied Thornton's military service record, noting annotations that suggested his duties went far beyond standard cavalry responsibilities. References to special assignments, treasury protocols, and enhanced security procedures appeared throughout his service documentation. According to Michael's research, Eleanor continued, Thornton was selected to manage the Montana facility because of its strategic location along major transportation routes and its natural defensive advantages. The Evergreen Valley location offered isolation, defensible terrain, and access to natural underground formations that could be expanded for storage purposes. She showed Jack geological surveys that Michael had obtained from the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology, documenting the extensive cave systems and underground formations throughout the Evergreen Valley region. The surveys revealed a network of natural chambers and tunnels that extended deep into the mountainside, providing ideal conditions for secure storage. Michael believed that Thornton used these natural formations as the foundation for an expanded storage complex. Eleanor explained, showing Jack architectural drawings that Michael had created based on his analysis of the basement symbols and historical documents. The ranch house basement was just the access point to a much larger underground facility built into the mountainside itself. The scope of Michael's theory was beginning to overwhelm Jack. Eleanor, you're describing what would have been one of the largest construction projects in Montana Territory. How could something like that be built in secret? That's where Michael's research into the broader Western Treasury Reserve becomes crucial, Eleanor replied, opening another section of documents. The federal government had enormous resources available for classified projects, and they used cover stories to explain any unusual activity. She showed Jack documentation of legitimate federal projects throughout Montana Territory during the 1860s and 1870s military road construction, telegraph line installation, geological surveys, and mining claim assessments. Any of these activities could have provided cover for the construction of secret storage facilities. More importantly, Eleanor continued, Michael found evidence that the federal government used civilian contractors and local labor for much of the construction work. Workers were told they were building military depots or communication facilities, not treasury storage installations. Jack examined payroll records that Michael had discovered showing payments to dozens of civilian workers for construction projects throughout Montana Territory. The amounts were substantial, suggesting major construction activities, but the project descriptions were deliberately vague. Michael also found evidence that the operation used advanced construction techniques for the time period, Eleanor explained, showing Jack technical documents describing engineering methods used in military construction projects. They employed techniques borrowed from European fortress construction, mining engineering, and even early concrete technology. The technical sophistication suggested in Michael's research was impressive. Documents described the use of specialized mortar waterproofing systems, air circulation methods, and structural reinforcement techniques that were cutting edge for the 1860s. But the most compelling evidence comes from the financial records, Eleanor continued, moving to what Michael had labeled as smoking gun documentation. Michael traced the flow of federal funds to Western Treasury Reserve installations and found that the Montana facility designated as Installation T in the coded records had received by far the largest allocation of resources. She showed Jack a series of Treasury documents tracking federal expenditures for Western territorial security operations. The Montana facility had received over $750,000 in federal funding between 1864 and 1876, an enormous sum for that period. $750,000 in 1860s. Currency would be worth over $20 million today, Jack calculated, beginning to understand the scale of the operation Michael had uncovered. And that was just the construction and operational costs, Eleanor added. The asset storage records show that Installation T received gold shipments totaling over $3 million in 1860s values throughout its operational period. Jack studied the asset tracking documents, noting the methodical record-keeping that tracked every shipment of gold, silver, and other valuables sent to the Montana facility. The amounts were staggering monthly shipments ranging from $75,000 to $250,000, representing gold from mining operations throughout the Western Territories. Michael calculated that if all these assets remained at the facility when the Western Treasury Reserve was terminated, Eleanor explained, the total value would exceed $300 million in today's currency. The number seemed almost too large to comprehend. Jack walked around the basement, trying to imagine the underground complex that Michael believed lay hidden beneath their feet. Eleanor, if even a fraction of this is true, why isn't it documented in mainstream historical sources? How could an operation this massive remain secret for over 140 years? Eleanor opened a final section of Michael's research, labeled cover-up and concealment. That's what Michael spent his final months trying to understand. He found evidence of a deliberate effort to erase the Western Treasury Reserve from the historical record. After its termination in 1878, all traces of the operation were systematically removed. The documents in this section painted a picture of bureaucratic cover-up and institutional amnesia. References to the Western Treasury Reserve had been systematically removed from official records. Participants had been reassigned or transferred, and documentation had been classified or destroyed. Michael found evidence that the operation's termination was connected to major political changes in Washington. Eleanor explained, showing Jack correspondence between Treasury officials and congressional leaders. The incoming Hayes administration wanted to distance itself from what they saw as irregular financial practices by the previous administration. Jack studied a memo from 1878 discussing the normalization of Western territorial financial operations and the elimination of non-standard storage protocols. The language was bureaucratic, but the intent was clear. The Western Treasury Reserve was being shut down for political rather than practical reasons. But the most significant discovery was Michael's evidence that the shutdown was incomplete. Eleanor continued, pulling out what appeared to be an inventory document from 1878. This report from military investigators shows that substantial assets remained at Installation T when the termination order was issued, but there's no record of those assets being relocated. The inventory was detailed and troubling. It listed gold coins, silver bars, currency, jewelry, and other valuables totaling over $600,000 in 1878 values. Notation suggested that the investigating team had been ordered to return within 90 days to complete the asset recovery, but Michael had found no evidence that they ever did. "Why not?" Jack asked. "Political chaos in Washington, budget cuts, and the reassignment of key personnel," Eleanor replied, showing Jack documentation of the bureaucratic turmoil that had followed the change in presidential administrations. Officers who knew about the Western Treasury Reserve were scattered to different assignments. The institutional knowledge was lost. Jack studied the evidence with growing amazement. Michael's research suggested that one of the largest secret government operations in American history had simply been forgotten by the bureaucrats who had created it, leaving millions of dollars in assets hidden in remote locations throughout the Western Territories. Michael believed that Major Thornton's death was the final factor that ensured the assets would remain hidden. Eleanor explained, showing Jack the evidence Michael had assembled about Thornton's mysterious demise. Thornton was the only person who knew the exact location and access procedures for the stored assets. When he died suddenly, that knowledge died with him. The evidence surrounding Thornton's death was particularly compelling. Beyond the discrepancies between official and newspaper accounts that Eleanor had mentioned earlier, Michael had found evidence suggesting that Thornton had been involved in disputes with his federal supervisors about compensation and asset ownership. Michael found letters suggesting that Thornton believed he was entitled to a percentage of the stored assets as compensation for his years of service, Eleanor explained. Federal officials apparently disagreed, and the dispute was escalating. When Thornton died, Jack examined the correspondence, noting the increasingly hostile tone of the exchanges between Thornton and his superiors. Several letters contained what could be interpreted as threats, and the final communication from federal officials was particularly ominous. Major Thornton is reminded that his obligations regarding classified materials continue indefinitely. Any attempt to claim personal ownership of federal assets would constitute treason. Jack read aloud from a letter dated just 3 weeks before Thornton's death. Michael believed Thornton was killed to prevent him from either exposing the Western Treasury Reserve or making personal claims on the stored assets, Eleanor said quietly. And when Thornton died, the secret of the hidden treasure died with him. The research materials spread throughout the basement represented months of painstaking work, Thousands of dollars in document acquisition costs, and what Eleanor now realized had been Michael's growing obsession with uncovering one of the most significant historical conspiracies in American history. "Jack," she said, looking around at the evidence of her husband's dedication, "Michael gave his life trying to prove this theory. Whether he died of natural causes or something more sinister, he was consumed by his pursuit of this truth. I can't let his work be lost when we're this close to finding out if he was right." Jack nodded slowly, overwhelmed by the scope and detail of Michael's research. The evidence was far more compelling than he had expected, and the potential reward was almost beyond comprehension. But more than that, he was moved by the depth of Michael's dedication and Eleanor's determination to honor her husband's memory. "All right," he said finally, looking toward the north wall where the carved symbols waited to reveal their secrets. "Let's see if Michael figured out how to unlock this mystery." As they prepared to test Michael's theory about the hidden entrance mechanism, both Eleanor and Jack understood that they were about to discover whether one man's obsessive research had uncovered the truth about one of America's greatest hidden treasures, or whether they were chasing the elaborate fantasy of a brilliant mind consumed by historical mysteries. Either way, they were about to honor Michael's memory by completing the investigation that had become his life's work. Eleanor approached the north wall with Michael's notebook in one hand and his carefully prepared tools in the other. The carved symbols seemed to watch her expectantly, waiting to reveal secrets that had been hidden for over 140 years. Her heart pounded as she realized she was about to test her husband's life work, the theory that had consumed his final months and possibly cost him his life. "According to Michael's translation," she said, running her finger along the sequence of symbols he had identified, "these 3 stones need to be pressed in a specific order. The first symbol represents access, the second means depth, and the third indicates security protocol engaged." Jack positioned himself with Michael's high-powered LED lights, illuminating the wall section where Michael had focused his final research. The symbols were clearer under the bright light, precise geometric patterns, carved deep into the stone with obvious intentionality. "What exactly are we supposed to do?" Jack asked, studying the marks with newfound respect. Eleanor consulted Michael's final notebook entry, reading his excited handwriting aloud. "The access sequence requires applying pressure to the center of each marked stone for approximately 15 seconds, beginning with the stone bearing the compass rose symbol, followed by the depth marker, and concluding with the security seal. If my translation of the Civil War engineering codes is correct, this should activate a mechanical system designed to remain functional even after decades of disuse." She placed her palm against the first stone, a large block marked with a carved compass rose. The stone felt solid and immovable, but as she applied steady pressure, she thought she detected a slight give, as if something behind the stone was responding to the force. "I think I feel something," she whispered, pressing harder against the stone. After nearly 15 seconds of sustained pressure, she heard a faint clicking sound from somewhere behind the wall, followed by what sounded like the movement of mechanical components that hadn't operated in generations. Jack leaned closer, straining to hear the sounds from within the wall. "That definitely sounded like machinery. Your husband was right about there being some kind of mechanism back there." Eleanor moved to the second stone, which bore a symbol that Michael had translated as representing depth or levels below ground. This stone felt different under her hands, slightly warmer than the surrounding masonry, and with what felt like subtle vibrations when she applied pressure. Michael's notes mentioned that the original builders designed these mechanisms to operate even after extended periods of disuse, Eleanor explained as she maintained pressure on the second stone. They used counterweight systems and mechanical linkages that wouldn't depend on regular maintenance. After 15 seconds of pressure on the second stone, they heard a more pronounced mechanical response, the sound of heavy counterweights moving behind the wall. followed by what seemed to be the release of some kind of locking mechanism. The sounds echoed through the basement with the resonance of movements taking place in a much larger space than they could see. "One more," Eleanor said, moving to the final stone in the sequence. This one bore the most complex symbol and intricate design that Michael had identified as a security seal used by Union Army engineers to mark classified installations. The third stone responded differently than the first two. As Eleanor applied pressure, she felt it beginning to recede into the wall, moving slowly but steadily, as if connected to a precisely engineered mechanism designed to operate smoothly despite its age. "It's moving," Jack said, his voice filled with amazement as they watched the stone slide backward into the wall cavity. Michael was absolutely right about this being some kind of entrance system. As the third stone completed its rearward movement, they heard a series of mechanical sounds that seemed to come from throughout the wall, gears turning, counterweights adjusting, and finally the unmistakable sound of a heavy barrier beginning to move. A section of the north wall, approximately 5 feet wide and 7 feet tall, began to swing inward like a massive door. The movement was slow and deliberate, accompanied by the groaning of metal hinges that hadn't operated in over a century. But the mechanism functioned exactly as Michael had theorized, revealing an opening that led into darkness beyond. "My God," Jack breathed, staring at the entrance that had materialized from what had appeared to be solid stone wall. Michael actually figured it out. He cracked a Civil War-era engineering puzzle that's been hidden for 140 years. Eleanor felt tears welling in her eyes as she realized that her husband's obsessive research had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. "He was right about everything," she whispered. "The symbols, the hidden entrance, the engineering, all of it." The opening revealed a stone-lined passageway that extended into the mountainside beyond the ranch house foundation. Cool air flowed from the passage, carrying the scent of old stone and something else, metallic quality that suggested the presence of substantial amounts of metal somewhere in the darkness ahead. "We need to document this carefully," Eleanor sighed, forcing herself to think practically despite her emotional response to vindicating Michael's work. "This is one of the most significant historical discoveries in Montana history." Jack began photographing the hidden entrance with his phone, capturing the intricate stonework of the passage and the ingenious mechanical system that Michael had decoded. "Eleanor, do you realize we may have just discovered the entrance to the largest cache of Civil War treasure in American history?" Eleanor gathered Michael's archaeological equipment, flashlights, measuring tools, and the digital camera he had prepared for documenting whatever he might find beyond the hidden entrance. Michael spent months preparing for this moment. "We're going to do this right." The passage beyond the entrance was approximately 7 feet wide and 8 feet tall, lined with the same precisely fitted stonework they had seen in the basement. But this construction was even more impressive. The stones were larger and more perfectly matched, creating walls that showed no signs of deterioration despite their age. This passage shows construction techniques that were incredibly advanced for the 1870s, Eleanor observed as they began moving through the tunnel. The stonework rivals anything built by European master masons of that period. The passage extended straight into the mountainside for approximately 60 feet before opening into a larger chamber. Their flashlight beams revealed a space that took their breath away, a vast underground room carved from the living rock of the mountain, with walls that rose nearly 25 feet to a vaulted stone ceiling. "This is incredible," Jack said, his voice echoing in the large space. Michael was right about there being an entire complex down here, but it was the contents of the chamber that truly amazed them. Along the walls stood rows of wooden crates, their surfaces covered with dust, but otherwise remarkably preserved in the cool, dry environment. In the center of the room sat what appeared to be a massive iron safe, its surface decorated with elaborate Victorian-era metalwork and the seal of the United States Treasury Department. "Jack," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with excitement. "We found it. We actually found the Western Treasury Reserve Vault." The chamber was larger than Michael's drawings had suggested, roughly 40 feet square with additional passages leading deeper into the mountain. The construction showed the same military engineering principles they had seen in the basement, but on a vastly larger scale. Eleanor began documenting the chamber systematically, photographing every wall, every crate, and every detail of the construction. "Michael would be so proud," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He spent his life trying to prove this place existed, and here it is, exactly as he theorized." Jack approached the nearest row of crates, examining the markings stenciled on their surfaces. "These crates are marked with Treasury Department codes and what appear to be dates from the 1860s and 1870s. And look at this. Some of them are marked U.S. Mint Denver and Montana Territorial Assay Office." The crates were substantial, each approximately 3 feet square, and built from heavy hardwood that had been reinforced with iron bands. The craftsmanship suggested they had been designed for transporting and storing valuable materials over long periods. "We need to see what's inside one of these crates," Eleanor said, selecting a smaller container that appeared to be more manageable than the larger storage boxes. The crate was secured with iron bands and a locking mechanism, but Michael had brought tools that were designed for exactly this kind of investigation. Using Michael's pry bar and drill, they carefully removed the iron bands securing the crate. The wood was solid but workable, and after several minutes of careful effort, they were able to lift the heavy wooden lid. The contents took their breath away. The crate was filled with canvas bags, each one heavy with the unmistakable weight and feel of metal coins. Eleanor carefully lifted one of the bags, loosening the drawstring to reveal its contents. Gold coins. Spilled into her palm, not modern currency, but vintage double eagles, their surfaces gleaming as if they had been minted yesterday. The coins were dated from the 1860s and 1870s, and their condition was absolutely perfect, sealed away from air and moisture in this perfect underground environment. They showed no signs of tarnish or wear. "These are $20 gold pieces from the Civil War era," Jack said, examining one of the coins with amazement. "To collectors, coins in this condition from that period are worth thousands of dollars each, far more than their gold content." Eleanor quickly assessed the remaining bags. In the crate, there were 24 bags of similar size, and if they were all filled with gold coins of this quality, they were looking at a single crate worth potentially millions of dollars. "And this is just one crate," Jack said, looking around at the dozens of similar containers arranged throughout the chamber. "Eleanor, if even half of these crates contain similar contents, we're looking at a treasure worth tens of millions of dollars." But it was the massive safe in the center of the chamber that held their attention next. The iron vault was approximately 10 feet tall and 8 feet wide, its surface decorated with elaborate engravings and the official seal of the United States Treasury Department. A brass plate on the front bore the inscription, "Federal Reserve Installation T, authorized personnel only." This has to be the primary storage vault that Michael found references to in the military documents, Eleanor said, approaching the safe with reverence. According to his research, this would contain the most valuable assets stored at the installation. The safe was secured with a large dial combination lock, its brass mechanism still bright despite its age. Eleanor pulled out Michael's notebook, looking for any clues he might have discovered about the combination. Michael found references to numerical codes in some of the military correspondence, she said, flipping through pages of research notes. Jack studied the numbers while Eleanor examined the combination dial. Those could be significant dates: 64 when the installation was established, 7-4 would be July 4th, and 1776 would be the founding of America. Michael's notes suggest that Civil War military installations often used historically significant dates as combinations for security devices, Eleanor explained. The theory was that authorized personnel would be able to remember the combinations, even without written records. Eleanor carefully removed one of the canvas bags from the safe, feeling its significant weight. When she opened it, she found it filled with gold coins of various denominations, double eagles, eagles, and half eagles, all in pristine condition. According to Michael's research, she said, the safe was supposed to contain the most concentrated wealth from the entire Western Treasury Reserve Network gold from mining operations throughout Montana Territory, plus assets transferred from other installations when they were closed. Jack was examining the silver bars, noting the various stamps and markings that indicated their origins. These bars are from mines that were famous during the Montana Gold Rush, the Last Chance Gulch. Operation Alder Gulch Mining District, Virginia City. This represents the concentrated wealth of Montana's most productive mining period. As they continued exploring the safe's contents, Eleanor found wooden boxes containing jewelry that had apparently been part of the stored assets: pocket watches, rings, necklaces, and other items that represented personal wealth stored for safekeeping during turbulent times. But there's something else, Eleanor said, noticing a leather portfolio in the back of the safe. Michael's research mentioned that Installation T was also used to store important documents and records. The portfolio contained papers that were even more significant than the treasure itself: original documents related to the Western Treasury Reserve, including detailed inventories of assets stored at various installations, correspondence between Treasury officials and military commanders, and what appeared to be the original authorization for the entire network signed by President Lincoln himself. These documents prove the existence of the entire Western Treasury Reserve Network, Eleanor said, carefully examining the presidential authorization. This is one of the most significant historical discoveries in American history. Jack was overwhelmed by the scope of their discovery. Eleanor, we haven't just found a treasure, we found evidence of one of the largest secret government operations of the Civil War era, plus documentation that proves its existence. As they continued exploring the chamber, they discovered additional passages leading to other storage areas. The installation was even larger than Michael had theorized, a complex network of chambers and tunnels that extended deep into the mountainside. Michael spent his life trying to prove that this place existed, Eleanor said, looking around at the treasure vault that vindicated her husband's obsessive research. He gave everything to uncover this truth, and now we know he was right about all of it. Jack nodded, understanding the emotional significance of the discovery for Eleanor. He was a brilliant researcher and a dedicated historian. This discovery will establish him as one of the most important historical investigators in American history. As they prepared to return to the surface with documentation of their incredible discovery, Eleanor felt a complex mixture of emotions: joy at vindicating Michael's work, excitement about the treasure that would save the ranch and secure their future, and sadness that Michael hadn't lived to see his theories proven correct. "We need to contact the authorities immediately," she said, beginning to gather their equipment. "This discovery needs to be properly documented and protected." Jack paused, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Eleanor, before we do that, we need to think carefully about the implications. This isn't just a historical find, it's potentially $300 million in assets that have been forgotten for over a century." Eleanor looked at him questioningly. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything unethical," Jack clarified quickly, "but we need to understand the legal situation before we announce this to the world. According to Montana law, who would own these assets?" Eleanor considered this carefully. During his research, Michael had investigated this exact question, consulting with legal experts about treasure trove laws and historical discoveries. Michael's research indicated that under Montana treasure trove laws, abandoned property reverts to the owner of the land where it's found, she explained. Since the federal government effectively abandoned these assets in 1878 and never returned to claim them, they would legally belong to the property owner. And that's you, Jack said. At least for the next 3 days, until the foreclosure. The realization hit Eleanor with full force. If they announced the discovery immediately, the bank might try to accelerate the foreclosure or claim rights to the treasure. But if they waited until after the property changed hands, she would lose all claim to both the ranch and the historical treasure that Michael had given his life to discover. "We need legal advice," she said, the practical side of her nature asserting itself through the excitement. "And we need it quickly." Jack nodded in agreement. "I know someone, Amanda Larson, a property attorney in Bozeman, who specializes in historical preservation cases. She can help us navigate this situation properly." As they carefully retraced their steps through the passage back to the basement, Eleanor's mind raced with the implications of their discovery. The financial value of the treasure was almost incalculable, easily enough to save the ranch, pay off all debts, and establish a foundation for historical research in Michael's name. But the historical significance transcended mere monetary value. This was evidence of a hidden chapter in American history, a secret government operation that had been buried for generations. "Jack, we need to document everything properly before we leave," Eleanor said as they re-entered the basement. "If something happens, if someone else discovers this, before we can secure legal protection, we need proof of what we found." They spent the next 2 hours meticulously photographing and cataloging everything they had discovered: the hidden entrance mechanism, the underground passage, the vast storage chamber, the crates of coins, and most importantly, the historical documents from the safe. Eleanor was careful to follow proper archaeological documentation procedures, creating a detailed record that would stand up to scientific and legal scrutiny. "This should be enough to establish our claim," Jack said, as they reviewed the hundreds of photographs they had taken. "Now we need to secure the entrance until we can get proper legal protection." They carefully closed the hidden doorway, making sure the mechanism reset properly. Eleanor felt a momentary panic as the stone wall slid back into place, hiding the passage to the treasure chamber. What if they couldn't get it open again? But Michael's notes were clear and detailed. They now understood exactly how the access system worked. As they climbed the stairs back to the main floor of the ranch house, Eleanor felt a strange sense of calm descend over her. After months of grief and financial stress, the path forward suddenly seemed clear. She would honor Michael's memory, not just by saving the ranch he loved, but by sharing his historical discovery with the world in a way that would establish his legacy as a serious researcher. "Jack, I need you to do something for me," she said as they reached the main room. "I need you to delay the foreclosure proceedings, just for a week or two, until we can get proper legal advice and secure our claim to the discovery." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "I can probably convince the bank to grant a short extension. They've been surprisingly flexible so far, given the property's troubled history. If I tell them there's new interest from a potential buyer, they might give us another 2 weeks. "That should be enough time," Eleanor said. "We'll contact Amanda tomorrow, show her our documentation, and develop a proper legal strategy. Then we'll approach the Montana Historical Society and the State Museum about a formal archaeological survey." They spent the remainder of the day organizing Michael's research materials, creating a comprehensive file that connected his historical investigations with their physical discoveries. By sunset, they had assembled a compelling case that would establish Michael's role as the primary discoverer of the Western Treasury Reserve Vault, ensuring that his name would be forever associated with one of the most significant historical finds of the century. As darkness fell over Evergreen Valley Ranch, Eleanor stood on the front porch, looking out over the property that had been both Michael's dream and his obsession. The failing cattle ranch that had seemed like such a burden now held one of the most valuable historical treasures ever discovered in North America. More importantly, It contained the vindication of Michael's life's work proof that his historical theories had been correct all along. "I wish you could see this, Michael," she whispered to the cold Montana night. "You were right about everything." The next morning, Eleanor and Jack drove to Bozeman to meet with Amanda Larson, the historical preservation attorney Jack had recommended. Amanda's office was located in a renovated historic building downtown, its brick walls covered with framed documents relating to significant Montana preservation cases she had handled over the years. "So, what's this urgent legal matter that couldn't be discussed over the phone?" Amanda asked after Jack had made the introductions. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had spent decades navigating complex legal challenges. Eleanor took a deep breath. "Before I explain, I need your assurance of attorney-client privilege. What I'm about to tell you involves a historical discovery of extraordinary significance." Amanda's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. Of course, anything you share with me is completely confidential." Over the next hour, Eleanor and Jack presented their discovery, showing Amanda the photographs they had taken of the underground chamber and its contents, along with Michael's research documentation that established the historical context of the Western Treasury Reserve. Amanda listened with increasing amazement, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific details. When they finished their presentation, she sat back in her chair, visibly processing the implications. "In my 30 years of practice, I've never encountered anything quite like this," she said finally. "You're describing what might be the most significant historical and treasure discovery in Montana history." "That's why we came to you," Eleanor explained. "We need to understand the legal implications before we make this public. The ranch is scheduled for foreclosure in 2 days, and we need to know how to protect both the historical discovery and my rights as the property owner." Amanda nodded thoughtfully. "The legal situation is complex but manageable. Under Montana treasure trove laws, abandoned property generally belongs to the finder if it's discovered on public land, or to the landowner if it's found on private property. Since your husband was the one who discovered the evidence leading to this find, and you're the current property owner, you have a strong legal claim to the discovery." "But the foreclosure complicates things," Jack added. "It does," Amanda agreed. "If the bank takes possession of the property, they could potentially claim ownership of anything found on the land. However, there's an important distinction here. This isn't just a random discovery of abandoned property. It's a historically significant find with clear documentation, showing your husband's research led directly to its discovery." She tapped her pen thoughtfully on her legal pad. "My recommendation would be to file for emergency historical designation before the foreclosure proceeds. Under Montana's Historical Preservation Act, properties with significant historical or archaeological value can receive temporary protection while their status is evaluated." "How quickly could that happen?" Eleanor asked. "With the evidence you've presented, I could file an emergency petition today." Given the extraordinary nature of the discovery, the State Historical Preservation Office would likely grant temporary protected status within 48 hours before your foreclosure deadline. "And what would that mean for the bank's claim?" Amanda's expression grew more serious. "That's where things get complicated. While abandoned property laws would typically grant ownership to the landowner, the fact that these were federal government assets adds another layer of complexity. The Treasury Department might argue that government property can never be legally abandoned. But Michael's research showed the operation was officially terminated in 1878, Eleanor pointed out. The government had ample opportunity to recover these assets and chose not to." "That's a strong argument in your favor," Amanda agreed. "And there's precedent for similar cases where the federal government failed to claim abandoned military property. At minimum, as the discoverer, you would be entitled to a substantial finder's fee, typically between 10 to 30% of the total value." Eleanor did a quick mental calculation. Even at the lowest percentage, that would mean at least $30 million, more than enough to save the ranch and establish the historical foundation she had envisioned. There's another option to consider, Amanda continued. Rather than fighting the government for ownership, you could propose a partnership offering to donate the historical artifacts and documents to the National Archives and the Smithsonian, while negotiating for a percentage of the monetary assets as a finder's fee. That approach often results in more favorable terms and avoids lengthy legal battles. Eleanor nodded slowly. That makes sense. The most important thing is preserving the historical significance of Michael's discovery. The money is secondary to ensuring his research is recognized. Exactly, Amanda said, warming to Eleanor's perspective. By positioning this as a collaborative historical preservation effort rather than a treasure claim, you'll likely achieve a better outcome for everyone involved. She closed her notepad decisively. If you're comfortable proceeding, I'll draft the emergency historical designation petition immediately. We can have it filed with the State Preservation Office by this afternoon. Do it, Eleanor said without hesitation. And thank you. As they left Amanda's office, Eleanor felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time since Michael's death, she had a clear path forward, a way to honor his memory, preserve his discovery, and secure their shared dream of maintaining Evergreen Valley Ranch. What now? Jack asked as they walked back to his car. Eleanor checked her watch. Now we drive to Helena to meet with Dr. Melissa Redhawk at the Montana Historical Society. She needs to see our evidence firsthand. The 3-hour drive to the state capitol gave Eleanor time to organize her thoughts about how best to present their discovery to the historical community. This wasn't just about claiming ownership of a valuable treasure, it was about establishing Michael's legacy as a serious historical researcher who had uncovered a forgotten chapter of American history. Dr. Redhawk received them in her office. At the Montana Historical Society, her initial professional politeness quickly giving way to intense interest as Eleanor began presenting their findings. As a specialist in 19th century Montana territorial history, she immediately grasped the significance of what they were showing her. This is extraordinary, she said, carefully examining the photographs of the historical documents they had found in the safe. If authenticated, these materials would fundamentally change our understanding of federal financial operations during the post-Civil War period. Then you believe Michael's research about the Western Treasury Reserve? Eleanor asked. The evidence is compelling, Dr. Redhawk acknowledged. I was skeptical when you first mentioned his theories last week, but these documents, particularly the presidential authorization and the operational directives, are consistent with other classified federal programs from that era. She studied the photographs of the underground chamber with growing excitement. And you say this facility extends throughout the mountainside? Multiple chambers and storage areas? At least 3 distinct chambers that we observed, Jack confirmed, though there appeared to be additional passages we didn't have time to explore. Dr. Redhawk set down the photographs and looked at Eleanor with newfound respect. Your husband was clearly a meticulous researcher. The historical community owes him a debt of gratitude for uncovering this forgotten operation. Will the Historical Society support our petition for emergency historical designation? Eleanor asked. Without question, Dr. Redhawk replied. I'll personally write a letter of endorsement today. This site represents one of the most significant historical discoveries in Montana's history, possibly in American history. It needs immediate protection and proper archaeological assessment. By the time they left Helena that evening, Eleanor had secured not only Dr. Redhawk's endorsement, but her commitment to fast-track an official historical assessment of the Evergreen Valley Ranch site. The Montana Historical Society would send a team of specialists the following day to begin documenting the underground chambers and their contents. This is really happening, Eleanor said as they drove back toward Bozeman. Michael's research is being taken seriously by professional historians. Jack smiled. And Amanda just texted she filed the emergency historical designation petition, and the preservation office has already scheduled an emergency review for tomorrow morning. Things are moving faster than we expected. Eleanor gazed out at the Montana landscape passing by, the rugged mountains silhouetted against the setting sun. For the first time since Michael's death, she felt a genuine sense of purpose, a connection not just to her husband's memory, but to his passion for uncovering historical truths. "You know what this means, don't you?" Jack asked after they had driven in companionable silence for several miles. "What?" "You're going to need a new business card," he said with a grin. "Eleanor Blackwood, wildlife veterinarian and discoverer of America's greatest hidden treasure." Eleanor laughed for what felt like the first time in months. The idea of being known as a treasure discoverer rather than just a wildlife veterinarian seemed absurd. Yet here they were, racing against time to secure legal protection for what might be the most significant historical find of the century. "First, let's make sure we actually save the ranch," she said. "Then we can worry about business cards." When they returned to Evergreen Valley Ranch that evening, Eleanor was surprised to find a black SUV parked near the main house. As they pulled up, a tall woman in a crisp suit emerged from the vehicle. "Ms. Blackwood?" The woman called as Eleanor stepped out of Jack's car. "I'm Special Agent Rebecca Morgan, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I was hoping we could speak privately about a matter of historical significance." Eleanor and Jack exchanged alarmed glances. How had news of their discovery spread so quickly? "May I ask what this is regarding?" Eleanor responded cautiously. Agent Morgan produced her credentials. "It concerns certain historical documents that may have been discovered on this property. The Bureau has been monitoring research into classified 19th century government operations, and your husband's name has appeared in several database searches over the past year." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Montana evening. The government had been aware of Michael's research all along? "I think we should continue this conversation inside," Eleanor suggested, leading the way to the ranch house. Once seated in the main room, surrounded by Michael's research materials, Agent Morgan's professional demeanor softened slightly. "First, let me clarify that you're not in any trouble, Ms. Blackwood. The FBI's interest in this matter is purely historical. We have a specialized unit that deals with recovery of significant historical artifacts and documents, particularly those related to government operations." "And how exactly did you know to come here today?" Jack asked. Agent Morgan smiled thinly. She gestured toward Michael's research materials. "Your husband managed to piece together evidence that generations of historians missed. That's impressive work that deserves recognition." Jack remained unconvinced. "So the federal government isn't going to swoop in and claim ownership of everything we found?" "That's not my department," Agent Morgan admitted. "The Treasury Department will certainly have interest in the financial assets, but my role is to ensure the historical documentation is properly preserved." She reached into her briefcase and produced a business card. "I've taken the liberty of contacting the Smithsonian Institution. Their curator of 19th century American history is very interested in what you've discovered and is prepared to offer substantial support for proper archaeological documentation." Eleanor took the card, noting the Smithsonian contact information. "Why would you do this?" "Because history matters," Agent Morgan said simply. "And because your husband's work deserves to be recognized. The FBI isn't just interested in recovering the materials. We want to ensure the full story is told, including Michael Blackwood's role in uncovering this forgotten chapter of American history." By morning, the quiet ranch had transformed into a hive of activity. Amanda Larson arrived with news that the emergency historical designation had been granted, providing immediate protection for the property and its contents. Dr. Redhawk followed, with a team of historians and archaeologists from the Montana Historical Society. eager to begin documenting the underground chambers. Even the bank that held the mortgage seemed to have undergone an overnight change of heart. The foreclosure proceedings were officially suspended, pending the historical assessment, with a representative calling to express the bank's commitment to preserving Montana's historical heritage. It's amazing how quickly attitudes change when people realize there might be millions of dollars involved, Jack observed wryly as they watched the archaeological team setting up equipment in the basement. Eleanor nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Despite the excitement surrounding the discovery, she felt a profound sadness that Michael wasn't there to witness the validation of his research. "He should be here," she said quietly. This was his discovery, his passion. Jack placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He is here, Eleanor. Everything happening today is because of him, because he refused to accept conventional wisdom, because he followed his instincts and did the research no one else bothered to do." As the morning progressed, the full scale of their discovery began to emerge. The archaeological team's preliminary survey revealed that the underground complex was even larger than they had initially estimated, at least 7 interconnected chambers extending more than 200 feet into the mountainside, all built with the same extraordinary stonework and engineering precision. This facility wasn't just built to store gold, Dr. Redhawk explained as they reviewed the initial mapping results. It was designed as a complete operational center with storage vaults, living quarters, communications facilities, and even what appears to be an underground stable area for horses. This wasn't a simple depot. It was an entire self-contained installation built to function independently if necessary. The historical implications were staggering. Traditional history taught that the federal government had maintained standard financial operations during and after the Civil War, operating primarily through established banks and treasury offices. The existence of a parallel, highly classified financial system hidden in remote Western locations would require rewriting significant portions of American economic history. By midday, representatives from the Treasury Department, the Smithsonian Institution, and the National Archives had arrived, each with their own teams of specialists and their own interests in the discovery. What had begun as Eleanor's private quest to honor her husband's memory was rapidly evolving into a major historical event. Amanda pulled Eleanor aside as the various government teams argued over assessment priorities. "This is moving extremely fast," the attorney cautioned. "Before things progress any further, we need to establish clear parameters about ownership, credit, and financial considerations." Eleanor nodded, suddenly feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. "What do you suggest?" "I've drafted a preliminary agreement," Amanda explained, producing a document from her briefcase. "It establishes several key points. First, that Michael Blackwood is recognized as the primary discoverer of the Western Treasury Reserve installation based on his original research. Second, that all historical documents and artifacts of national significance will be preserved in appropriate federal institutions with proper attribution. Third, that as the property owner and heir to Michael's research, you retain certain rights to the discovery, including financial compensation under Treasure Trove laws. Eleanor reviewed the document carefully. "And what about the ranch itself?" "The emergency historical designation provides temporary protection, but we should push for permanent status," Amanda advised. "Given the historical significance of the site, I believe we can secure National Historic Landmark status, which would protect the property indefinitely while still allowing you to maintain ownership." "And the money?" Jack asked bluntly, joining their conversation. "The gold and other valuables?" Amanda lowered her voice. "The Treasury Department will certainly claim ownership of the monetary assets, arguing they remain government property, despite the passage of time. However, we have strong counter-arguments based on abandonment and treasure trove precedents." She handed Eleanor a second document. This proposes a settlement framework acknowledging federal ownership of the assets in exchange for a 25% finder's fee, tax-free, plus establishment of a foundation in Michael's name for ongoing historical research. Based on preliminary estimates, that would amount to approximately $75 million. Eleanor's breath caught. The amount was beyond anything she had imagined, enough to save the ranch many times over, to establish the research foundation Michael had always dreamed about, to secure their legacy for generations to come. Is this really possible? She asked, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. More than possible, Amanda assured her. The government has strong incentives to settle quickly and quietly rather than engage in protracted legal battles that would draw public attention to a classified historical operation they deliberately concealed for over a century. As the day progressed, Eleanor found herself in the surreal position of negotiating with representatives from multiple federal agencies about the disposition of a historical treasure her husband had discovered. Through years of painstaking research, the discussions were complex, sometimes tense, but ultimately productive. By evening, a framework agreement had been reached. The historical documents would go to the National Archives, with copies provided to the Montana Historical Society. The Smithsonian would oversee archaeological assessment of the site in partnership with Montana institutions. The Treasury Department would take custody of the monetary assets, with the agreed-upon finder's fee placed in escrow pending final valuation. Most importantly, Michael Blackwood would be officially recognized as the primary discoverer of the Western Treasury Reserve installation, with his name permanently associated with what was already being described as one of the most significant historical discoveries of the 21st century. As the various government teams prepared to depart for the day, promising to return with specialized equipment for a comprehensive assessment, Eleanor found herself alone in the ranch house for the first time since the discovery. The sudden quiet was almost disorienting after the day's frenetic activity. She wandered through the main room, touching the research materials that Michael had so carefully assembled: the maps, the documents, the notebooks filled with his precise handwriting. These papers represented thousands of hours of dedicated work, countless late nights poring over obscure historical references, years of patient investigation when everyone else thought he was chasing fantasies. "You did it, Michael," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "You found the truth when no one else could see it." A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Jack, looking exhausted but satisfied. "How are you holding up?" he asked, stepping inside. "Still processing," Eleanor admitted. "Yesterday, I was about to lose the ranch. Today I'm negotiating with the federal government about a $300 million historical treasure. It doesn't seem real." Jack smiled. "It's real. And it's all because of Michael's persistence and yours. Most people would have given up long ago." "I almost did," Eleanor confessed. "When the foreclosure notice came, I was ready to accept defeat. If we hadn't come here yesterday, if I hadn't found the courage to go into the basement." "But you did," Jack reminded her. "You chose to honor Michael's work when it would have been easier to walk away. That decision changed everything." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the Montana sunset through the windows. The ranch looked different now, not just a struggling cattle operation on the verge of foreclosure, but a place of historical significance, a site that would be studied and preserved for generations to come. "So what happens now?" Jack asked. Finally, Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling a clarity of purpose that had been missing since Michael's death. "Now we build the legacy he deserved. The Michael Blackwood Historical Research Foundation will support other independent researchers pursuing unconventional historical theories. We'll establish grants for students studying Montana territorial history. We'll create an educational center here at the ranch where people can learn about the Western Treasury Reserve and the hidden history of the American West. Her voice grew stronger as she outlined the vision. Michael always said that history isn't just what's written in textbooks, it's the stories that get forgotten, the truths that get buried. He dedicated his life to uncovering those hidden narratives. Now we can help others do the same. Jack nodded approvingly. He would have loved that. Using the discovery not just to secure the ranch, but to support other researchers who think outside conventional boundaries. And the ranch itself? Eleanor continued, warming to her plan. We'll restore it to what it was meant to be, a working cattle operation that honors Montana's agricultural heritage. We'll implement the sustainable ranching practices Michael was researching before he got caught up in the historical investigation. We'll show that it's possible to preserve both history and the land itself. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. The archaeological assessment revealed even more chambers and passages than initially estimated, with evidence suggesting the installation had been designed to house up to 50 people for extended periods if necessary. The monetary assets, once properly inventoried, exceeded even the most optimistic estimates, over $320 million in gold, silver, and historical currency at current market values. The media eventually caught wind of the discovery, leading to a flurry of news stories about America's greatest treasure find and the Montana cattle rancher's widow who uncovered a Civil War secret. Eleanor handled the attention gracefully, but firmly, always redirecting credit to Michael's research and insisting that the historical significance far outweighed the monetary value. 3 months after the initial discovery, the Michael Blackwood Historical Research Foundation was officially established with an endowment of $80 million, the final settlement amount negotiated with the Treasury Department. The ranch received permanent protection as a National Historic Landmark, with provisions ensuring Eleanor maintained ownership and operational control of the property. The foundation's inaugural event was held in the restored main barn of Evergreen Valley Ranch, transformed for the occasion into an elegant reception space that maintained its authentic Western character. Historians, archaeologists, government officials, and local ranchers mingled together, united by their appreciation for the extraordinary discovery that had rewritten a chapter of American history. Dr. Red Hawk delivered the keynote address, her words capturing the significance of what Michael had accomplished. True historical discovery requires more than just academic credentials. It demands persistence, imagination, and the courage to question established narratives. Michael Blackwood possessed all these qualities. Without formal historical training, working alone with limited resources, he uncovered a government operation that had been deliberately hidden for generations. His work reminds us that history belongs not just to institutions and experts, but to anyone with the determination to seek out the truth. As the event concluded, Eleanor found herself standing on the front porch of the ranch house, the same spot where she had stood with Jack just months earlier, facing what had seemed like inevitable foreclosure. The ranch around her was transformed not just by the financial security the discovery had brought, but by a renewed sense of purpose and connection to history. Jack joined her, handing her a glass of champagne. Quite a different view from the last time we stood here, isn't it? Eleanor nodded, looking out over the property that had been Michael's dream and was now their shared legacy. The cattle were back, a new breeding herd of premium Angus that would form the foundation of the ranch's renewed agricultural operations. The outbuildings were being restored according to historical specifications, preserving their 19th century character while incorporating modern sustainable technologies. Most significantly, construction had begun on the Western Treasury Reserve Educational Center, a facility that would allow visitors to learn about the secret financial operations that had helped stabilize the nation during one of its most turbulent periods. The underground chambers themselves would remain protected, accessible only to qualified researchers, but interactive exhibits would bring the discovery to life for the public. Michael always said this place was special, Eleanor reflected, her voice soft with memory. Even when everyone else saw just a failing ranch, he insisted there was something extraordinary here waiting to be discovered. He was right about that, Jack agreed. Just like he was right about the symbols, the hidden entrance, all of it. Eleanor raised her glass in a silent toast to her husband's memory. The tragedy of his untimely death would always remain the profound unfairness that he hadn't lived to see his theories validated, his research vindicated. But in another sense, he was more present than ever before, his name permanently associated with a historical discovery that would be studied for generations. You know what I keep thinking about? Eleanor said after a moment. That morning, when the foreclosure notice arrived, I was ready to give up, to accept that the ranch was lost and Michael's research was just an unfulfilled dream. She shook her head at the memory of her own resignation. If I hadn't decided to make one final visit, if I hadn't found the courage to go down to the basement where he died, all of this would have remained hidden. The historical truth would have been lost when the property changed hands. But you did find that courage, Jack reminded her. You chose to honor his work when it would have been easier to walk away. Eleanor nodded, understanding now what. Michael had always known that the most valuable treasures aren't always gold or silver, but the truths that lie hidden beneath the surface, waiting for someone with enough persistence and vision to uncover them. The Montana sunset painted the valley in shades of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the ranch that had nearly been lost and was now preserved for future generations. In the distance, the entrance to the underground chambers, now secured, with a modern steel door disguised to match the historical stonework, stood as a testament to the extraordinary discovery that had changed everything. The Michael Blackwood Historical Research Foundation is proud to announce its first grant recipients, Eleanor said, sharing the news she had received that morning. 5 independent researchers pursuing unconventional historical investigations, each receiving $100,000 to support their work. Jack smiled. Creating more Michael Blackwoods out there, challenging conventional wisdom and looking where others haven't thought to look. Exactly, Eleanor agreed. Because that's the real legacy here, not just the treasure itself, but the example he set. The proof that one person with determination and vision can uncover truths that institutions and experts have missed for generations. As darkness settled over Evergreen Valley Ranch, Eleanor felt a profound sense of completion. The desperate struggle to save the property had evolved into something far more meaningful, a mission to preserve both historical truth and Michael's legacy as the researcher who had uncovered it. The story of Eleanor Blackwood's incredible discovery spread quickly through historical and archaeological communities, establishing the Western Treasury Reserve fined as one of the most significant discoveries in American history. The $300 million. In Civil War era, assets not only saved the ranch from foreclosure, but funded the establishment of the Michael Blackwood Institute for Historical Research, ensuring that her husband's passion for uncovering hidden truths would continue inspiring future generations of researchers and historical investigators. The Western Treasury Reserve, once one of America's most closely guarded secrets, finally took its rightful place in the historical record, thanks to one man's relentless pursuit of truth and his widow's courage in completing the work that had defined his final years. And Evergreen Valley Ranch, once dismissed as Blackwood's Blunder, became a place of pilgrimage for historians, archaeologists, and ordinary citizens drawn to the extraordinary story of persistence, discovery, and vindication against all odds. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.